You didn't stop overgiving because you became selfish. You stopped because something inside you finally recalibrated. And that shift wasn't emotional, it was physiological. Your body reached a limit. Your mind kept negotiating past. Overgiving never starts as imbalance, it starts as hope. Hope that consistency will create safety. Hope that effort will inspire reciprocity. Hope that if you show up fully, the other person will eventually meet you there. So you gave. You listened more. You adjusted faster. You stayed regulated. So the relationship could stay intact. You called it love, but your body called it labor. At first, you didn't feel drained. You felt useful, needed, connected. Overgiving often feels like purpose before it feels like depletion. And because you're emotionally intelligent, you notice subtle things, the imbalance, the delays, the way closeness required effort instead of mutual pull. So you compensated. You filled gaps. You bridged silence. You carried emotional weight that wasn't acknowledged, not because you lacked boundaries, because you valued connection. But over time, your nervous system started tracking something else. Cost, not dramatic cost, cumulative cost, the cost of staying alert, of managing tone, of anticipating moods, of being the one who keeps things smooth. Your body doesn't argue with logic. It responds to patterns. And the pattern said, giving more doesn't create safety. It creates strain. That's when the shift began, not as a decision, as fatigue, a quiet refusal to keep extending yourself without being met. You didn't announce it. You didn't withdraw dramatically. You just stopped reaching as far. And that's when it felt strange, because overgiving had become your normal. Effort felt like care. Restraint felt like loss. You wondered if you were becoming colder, less invested, less loving. But what actually changed was your baseline. Your system stopped equating love with overextension. It started prioritizing balance. And balance feels unfamiliar when you've lived in excess. This is the emotional shift no one prepares you for. When you stop overgiving, you don't feel empowered right away. You feel quiet, neutral, unstimulated, because chaos used to keep you engaged. Overgiving kept the relationship alive, but it kept you activated. Now, your energy stays closer to home. You wait, you observe, you let people show you how much they can meet without being carried. That's not detachment, that's discernment. And your body knows the difference. When you stop overgiving, the world doesn't collapse, but your relationships start telling the truth. Because overgiving was cushioning reality, it was softening disappointment before it could be felt. It was translating effort into meaning. And when that stops, you don't lose people, you lose illusions. You begin to notice who only felt close when you were doing more, who relaxed while you stayed alert, who assumed availability instead of appreciating presence. That realization can sting, not because they deceived you, but because you finally see how much of the connection was powered by you. This is where many women turn the insight inward. They say, I guess I loved harder. I cared more. I was just more invested. But that framing still keeps the imbalance personal. The truth is simpler. You were relating inside a system that rewarded overfunctioning. So you overfunctioned, not because you lacked self-worth, but because the environment didn't support mutual effort. When you stop overgiving, you stop buffering other people from their own emotional limits. You don't chase clarity. You don't repair alone. You don't smooth discomfort before it's even acknowledged. And that's when clarity arrives. Some people step forward. They notice the shift. They ask. They adjust. Others grow distant, confused, less engaged. Not because you changed, because the dynamic did. Overgiving kept them comfortable. Your regulation disrupts that comfort. This is not punishment. It's exposure. Exposure to who can meet you without being carried and who can't. Your body responds quickly to this clarity. Less tension, less anticipation, less internal negotiation. You stop scanning for cues. You stop managing timing. You stop rehearsing conversations. And suddenly, you have energy. Not explosive energy, quiet energy. Energy that stays with you. That's when you realize how much overgiving was costing you, not just emotionally, physiologically. It kept your nervous system in constant output, always responding, always adjusting, always extending. Stopping doesn't feel dramatic. It feels familiar, and familiar can feel wrong when you've used depletion. But wrong is sharp. This feels calm. That calm is your system recalibrating to fairness, to reciprocity, to relationships that don't require sacrifice to stay alive. This is the emotional shift. You no longer confuse effort with intimacy. You no longer equate giving with being chosen. You begin to trust that what doesn't meet you isn't meant to be managed. And that trust changes how you relate forever. There's a moment that doesn't get talked about. It happens after you stop overgiving, but before you feel fully steady. It's the moment where nothing rushes in to replace what you removed. No immediate reassurance, no dramatic apology, no sudden effort, just space. And that space can feel unsettling. If you were taught that love requires constant motion, overgiving trained your system to equate stillness with danger, silence with abandonment, distance with loss. So when you stop pushing, and nothing collapses, but nothing rushes forward either, your body asks a quiet question. Is this safe? This is where many women mistake regulation for detachment. They say, I feel less. I'm not as activated. I'm not chasing clarity. And they worry. They're becoming cold. But what's actually happening is capacity returning. Your nervous system is no longer bracing for relational instability. It's no longer trying to earn safety through effort. It's waiting, not passively, but honestly, waiting to see what meets you without being pulled. This is where relational truth becomes unavoidable, because when you stop initiating repair, who repairs? When you stop filling silence, who speaks? When you stop explaining needs, who notices them? Overgiving hid these answers. Regulation reveals them, and revelation can hurt. Before it heals, you may notice that some people only reach out when they need something, that conversations thin out without your emotional labor, that intimacy stalls without your scaffolding. This isn't because you were too much. It's because the connection was leaning. And when you stop holding it up, gravity does what it does. Here's the hardest part to accept. Some relationships weren't deep. They were active. They felt intense because you were constantly engaged. But intensity is not intimacy, and activity is not closeness. When overgiving stops, what remains is the actual emotional bond, not the effort, not the hope, not the potential, just the bond. And for the first time, you get to feel it clearly. That clarity can bring grief, not for the person, but for the version of yourself who believed love meant staying slightly ahead of disappointment. You might grieve how much you normalized being the steady one, the understanding one, the flexible one, the one who didn't ask because asking felt risky. This grief is not regression, it's integration. Your system is updating its definition of connection. It's learning that safety doesn't come from effort. It comes from mutual presence, from responsiveness that isn't prompted, from care that doesn't need instruction. This is why you start wanting less explanation and more evidence, not because you're hardened, but because your body no longer accepts words as substitutes for behavior. You're not pulling away, you're aligning your energy with what actually sustains you. And that alignment changes who feels close. Not everyone will, but the ones who do will feel different, quieter, more solid, less draining. And for the first time, you won't need to overgive to keep them. Eventually, the shift finishes integrating, not with fireworks, not with certainty, but with a quieter kind of knowing. You notice you're no longer rehearsing conversations in your head. You're no longer scanning tone, timing, micro changes. You're not bracing before you speak, and you're not collapsing. After you do, your body feels less busy. That's the signal. Overgiving kept your nervous system in constant orientation, watching, tracking, adjusting. It wasn't love, it was vigilance. And when vigilance ends, presence becomes possible. This is where emotional power actually lives, not in control, not in withholding, but in choice. You begin to notice how little effort healthy connection requires, how you don't need the right wording or perfect timing to be received, how your needs land without defense, how silence doesn't feel like punishment, how space doesn't trigger panic. This is what happens when your system learns that connection doesn't have to be earned. And here's the truth many women miss: stopping overgiving doesn't make you less loving, it makes your love accurate. You're no longer pouring into dynamics that can't hold you. You're no longer offering depth to people who avoid it. You're no longer translating yourself for someone committed to misunderstanding you. That's not detachment, that's discernment. And discernment feels calm because it's regulated. You might still care, but you no longer chase closeness at the cost of self respect. You no longer confuse longing with compatibility. You no longer mistake effort for intimacy. This is why your standards feel quieter now, not performative, not rigid, just clear. You know what your body needs because you finally stopped overriding it. You trust what feels easy. You notice what feels heavy, and you don't argue with either. That's emotional maturity, not perfection, not detachment, but self-trust. That doesn't require urgency. And when someone meets you here, they won't feel chased. They'll feel chosen because you're not giving from fear anymore. You're giving from fullness. If this felt familiar, not dramatic, but true, that's not coincidence. It's recognition. And recognition is where empowerment begins.